The moment the AlphaKing rejected her, everyone believed the cursed bride would simply disappear from history. No one in the great stone hall imagined that the girl kneeling beneath the shattered moonlight would become the most terrifying queen the ancient world had ever feared. But that night, when her wedding dress tore against the cold marble floor and something ancient awakened beneath her skin, the kingdoms of wolves would learn a truth they had buried for 1,000 years. The girl they called cursed was never human, and the AlphaKing who rejected her had just broken the seal of a sleeping dragon. The royal fortress of Blackthorn Keep stood like a fortress carved from the bones of the mountains themselves. Towering stone walls wrapped around the capital of the northern wolf kingdom, their battlements glowing silver beneath the rising moon. Inside the fortress, hundreds of torches flickered along vast corridors carved with ancient runes of wolf kings long dead. Tonight the fortress was alive with celebration. Nobles from every pack across the northern territories filled the great hall. Fur cloaks brushed against polished armor, and the banners of rival wolf clans hung from towering pillars. The air carried the scent of roasted meat, burning cedar wood, and the restless tension that always followed political marriages. Because no one here believed this wedding was meant to last. At the far end of the hall, beneath a throne carved from black obsidian and wolf fangs, stood the man who ruled them all, AlphaKing Kyle Draven. Even among wolves, Kyle Draven was something different. He was taller than most warriors in the room, broad-shouldered and unmoving like a mountain carved from iron. His dark armor was etched with silver runes of the royal bloodline, and the heavy wolf cloak draped across his shoulders was made from the pelt of the last alpha he had defeated in battle. But it was not his armor or his crown that made the hall silent whenever he moved. It was the presence of the beast inside him. The wolf of Kyle Draven was legendary across the northern kingdoms. Warriors whispered that when he shifted beneath the full moon, his wolf stood taller than war horses and could tear through an entire pack alone. He had conquered 3 rival territories before his 25th winter. He had crushed rebellions without mercy, and no one in the room tonight dared meet his eyes for long. Yet the AlphaKing did not look like a man celebrating his wedding. He looked like a man waiting for a war. The heavy doors of the hall creaked open. Every conversation died instantly, because the bride had arrived. She entered slowly, escorted by 2 soldiers wearing the crimson armor of the southern dragon province. Her wedding gown was white, though it had clearly been altered from something older and less regal. The fabric hung too loosely along her shoulders, as if it had been borrowed from someone who had once been meant to wear it proudly. But this girl wore it like a prisoner walking toward a sentence. Her name was Lyra Vale. Across the northern territories, people knew her by a different title, the Cursed Bride. She had arrived at Blackthorn Keep 3 months earlier as part of the fragile peace treaty between the Wolf Kingdom and the southern provinces. The treaty had ended a war that had burned for decades, and the price of that peace was Lyra, the daughter of a disgraced southern noble house, a girl rumored to carry forbidden blood, a bride the AlphaKing had never asked for. As Lyra stepped into the torchlight, whispers rippled through the crowd. "Look at her. She barely looks like a noble. They say the southern priests tried to burn her when she was born. My cousin swore her shadow moves when she sleeps. She has no wolf. I heard the southern packs tested her blood." A soft laugh drifted from the nobles gathered along the right side of the hall. Standing among them was Lady Seraphine of the Iron Fang clan, a woman famous for beauty, cruelty, and her very public belief that she would one day become Luna Queen beside Kyle Draven. Seraphine's golden eyes traced Lyra slowly, her smile thin with satisfaction. "How tragic," she murmured to the noble beside her. "A cursed creature forced to pretend she belongs among wolves." Lyra heard the words, but she did not respond. She had grown used to those whispers long before she arrived in the Wolf Kingdom, because they had followed her since the night she was born. Lyra Vale had never known her mother. According to the stories whispered by frightened servants, her mother died moments after bringing her into the world. Some said the woman had screamed about fire and wings before collapsing. Others claimed the newborn child had burned the midwife's hands without touching her. The southern priests had called it a sign of corruption. They tried to cleanse the infant, but the flames refused to harm her. After that night, the rumors began. Cursed child, demon blood, forbidden lineage. Lyra grew up inside the crumbling halls of her father's estate, hidden from the public eye. Servants crossed themselves when she passed. Priests watched her from dark corners. And when she reached 16 winters, the Southern Council finally decided what to do with her. They offered her to the wolves. Now she stood alone in the center of the Northern Kingdom's great hall, the weight of hundreds of judging eyes pressing against her skin. Across the chamber, AlphaKing Kale Draven watched her approach. His expression revealed nothing, but something inside him stirred. The moment Lyra stepped fully into the moonlight spilling through the towering windows above, Kale's wolf shifted uneasily beneath his skin. That had never happened before. Not once. His wolf had faced dragons, rival alphas, and entire battlefields without hesitation. Yet now the beast inside him was restless, alert, watching. Kyle dismissed the sensation instantly. It meant nothing. This marriage meant nothing. The southern provinces had demanded it to secure peace, and the Wolf Council had insisted it would stabilize the borders. But Kale Draven had never needed a bride to rule his kingdom, and he certainly had no intention of binding his fate to a cursed woman. Lyra reached the center of the hall and stopped. The priest of the Northern Pack stepped forward, raising a silver ceremonial blade that glowed faintly beneath the moonlight. "Tonight," the priest announced, his voice echoing across the chamber, "we witness the joining of two bloodlines. Through this union, the war between the Northern Wolf Kingdom and the Southern Provinces will finally end." His gaze moved between Kyle and Lyra. "AlphaKing Kale Draven, do you accept this bride and the alliance her blood represents?" The hall held its breath. Kyle did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Lyra. For the first time since entering the hall, she looked directly at him, and something about that gaze unsettled him. She did not look frightened. She did not look hopeful. She looked resigned, as if she had already accepted the cruelty that was about to follow. A flicker of irritation crossed Kale's mind. He despised weakness. He despised pity. And he despised being forced into political games by cowards hiding behind treaties. The priest waited. "So?" Seraphine whispered softly from the crowd. "Will the great AlphaKing truly bind himself to a cursed girl?" Kale finally spoke. His voice cut through the hall like a blade drawn from its sheath. "I will not." The words struck the room like thunder. Gasps erupted instantly. The priest froze. Lyra's fingers tightened against the torn fabric of her dress. But Kale had not finished. "I will not accept a cursed woman as my Luna." His voice grew colder with every word. "This marriage was demanded by cowards afraid of war. But I will not stain the bloodline of the Northern Wolves with Southern superstition." A ripple of shock spread through the nobles. The rejection had come sooner than anyone expected. Kyle stepped down from the throne dais, stopping only a few paces from Lyra. "You were sent here as a symbol of peace," he said, his voice quiet but merciless. "But you will never sit beside me as queen." The hall fell silent. Lyra slowly lowered her eyes. Around them, nobles began whispering eagerly. Some laughed. Others looked relieved. Seraphine's smile widened. The humiliation was complete. The AlphaKing had rejected his bride in front of the entire royal court. For a moment, nothing moved. Then something strange happened. The torches flickered. A faint tremor passed through the stone floor beneath Lyra's feet. Kyle noticed it immediately. So did his wolf. The beast inside him growled softly. Lyra's breathing had changed. Her shoulders trembled, not with tears, with something else. Something older. Something awakening. The priest frowned. "Bride," he said cautiously, "you may leave the hall." But Lyra did not move. Instead, she lifted her head slowly, and when Kale saw her eyes again, they were glowing. Not the golden glow of wolves, not the silver glow of magic, but a deep, burning crimson. For the first time that night, the AlphaKing felt something dangerously close to unease. Because in that moment, every ancient instinct inside his blood whispered the same impossible truth. The girl kneeling before him was not cursed. She was sealed, and Kael Draven had just broken the lock. Lyra's eyes burned like two embers pulled from the heart of a dying star, and for one suspended, impossible heartbeat, no one in the great hall dared to breathe. The torches along the stone walls hissed and bent, as if some unseen storm had entered the chamber, though every window remained shut and every banner hung still. Kael did not step back, but every sharpened instinct inside him rose at once. His wolf, that ruthless, ancient beast that feared neither blade nor rival Alpha, pressed hard against his ribs with a warning that felt almost like memory. Something in the air had changed. Something had opened, and the entire royal court, still trembling from the shock of the AlphaKing's public rejection, found itself staring not at a broken bride, but at a girl whose silence had suddenly become more frightening than any scream. Lyra lowered her gaze again, as if ashamed of what had slipped through her control, and the red fire in her eyes faded by a breath, though not completely. It lingered under her lashes like banked flame. Her hands were trembling now, and Kael saw, with a cold tightening in his chest, that the veins beneath her pale skin had begun to glimmer faintly with molten gold. The sight lasted no more than a blink. Then it was gone. Several nobles gasped. One of the older councilmen crossed himself with the sign wolves used against dark sorcery. The priest stumbled a half-step backward, the silver ceremonial blade shaking in his hand. "What trick is this?" he demanded, though the force had already gone out of his voice. Lyra opened her mouth as if to answer, but what left her throat was not words. It was a broken inhale, the sound of someone trying with everything they had not to come apart in front of enemies. Seraphine recovered first. Of course she did. Cruel women always did. She moved through the crowd with graceful certainty, silk and silver swaying around her like she had been waiting for this precise moment all evening. Her face wore concern, but her eyes glittered with triumph. "Your Majesty," she said softly, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. "You see now why this marriage should never have been considered. There is something unnatural in her." The hall, hungry and frightened, seized upon her words at once. Murmurs sharpened, unnatural, demon blood, southern witch, monster. Lyra's fingers tightened harder around the torn folds of her dress until her knuckles went white. Kael should have dismissed the scene, ordered the bride confined, restored authority by force. That would have been the simplest course. Yet he could not stop looking at her. There was no madness in her expression, no scheming, no ambition, only pain, deep, old pain. And beneath it, the rigid control of someone who had spent half a lifetime learning how not to burn the world when the world deserved it. Seraphine circled closer. "Perhaps," she continued, with poisonous sweetness, "the southern provinces sent not a bride, but a weapon." At that, several warriors reached instinctively for their swords. Kael lifted one hand, and they froze. His command still ruled the room. "Enough," he said. The single word struck the hall flat. But even as silence fell again, a second tremor moved under the floor, stronger this time, rippling through the marble with a low groan that rose from deep beneath the mountain. Goblets rattled. Dust slipped from the edges of old beams. Somewhere high above, one of the moonlit windows cracked in a fine silver line. Lyra's breath hitched sharply. She looked up, not at Kael, not at the crowd, but toward the ceiling, as if hearing something no one else could hear. Something calling her. Her lips parted, and Kael saw the terror there at last. Real terror. Not of the court, not of humiliation. Of herself. Before he could speak, Lyra lurched to one side as if struck. Her knees gave way completely, and she crashed onto both hands against the marble. The sound echoed through the hall. Gasps spread. A thin, painful cry tore from her throat, and this time the strange glow did not disappear. It raced beneath her skin in branching rivers of gold and crimson, lighting the delicate bones of her hands, her throat, her collarbone. Her torn white sleeves fluttered, though no wind touched them. The air around her had begun to shimmer with heat. KL moved without thinking. In 2 strides, he was beside her. When he reached for her shoulder, she flinched so violently he stopped inches away. "Do not touch me," she whispered, and the words were raw with panic. "Please." The plea made something inside him harden and soften at once. It was not fear for herself he heard. It was fear for everyone near her. The priest had backed nearly to the steps below the throne. "She is possessed," he shouted. "Seize her now before the curse spreads." That was the spark Seraphine needed. "Guards," she called, before Kale could countermand it. "The creature has shown its true nature. Protect your king." Steel rang from scabbards all around the hall. 6 northern warriors advanced. Kyle turned, fury flashing through him. "Stand down." But fear had already infected the room, and fear made fools deaf. One guard, younger than the rest and eager to prove himself, rushed first. He seized Lyra's arm. She screamed. The instant his hand touched her skin, a burst of blinding scarlet fire exploded through the chamber. The warrior was thrown backward as if hurled by a giant. He slammed into a pillar so hard the stone cracked, then crumpled to the floor unconscious. The blast extinguished every torch in the left half of the hall. Darkness swallowed that side of the room, broken only by moonlight, and the glow now pouring from Lyra's body. Women shrieked. Nobles stumbled over one another to retreat. Warriors raised shields. Seraphine's composed mask vanished for the first time, replaced by pale disbelief. Kale did not retreat. The heat rolling off Lyra struck him like a forge door flung open, yet still he stayed. His wolf snarled, not in fear now, but in recognition. Recognition of what? He did not know. Only that the power in front of him was not the wild black rot of corrupted magic. It felt ancient, regal, furious, and wounded beyond measure. Lyra pushed herself upright with visible effort, swaying unsteadily on torn skirts. Her face was wet not with tears, Kale realized a second later, but with sweat. Her entire body was fighting to hold something back. "I tried," she whispered, though whether she spoke to him, to herself, or to some ghost from years ago, he could not tell. "I tried not to let it out." Another crack spidered across the high window. Then, another. Somewhere beyond the walls of Blackthorn Keep, wolves began to howl, not in challenge, but in confusion and fear. Kyle's gaze sharpened. He had heard those howls before only twice in his life. Once when an elder beast rose from hibernation beneath the ice fields, and once when a dying prophet spoke in tongues during the last blood moon. The wolves of the fortress sensed something vast, something old enough to be remembered by instinct alone. "Everyone out," Kyle ordered. His voice thundered through the hall. "Now." This time they obeyed. Panic finally found direction. Nobles fled through the side passages, clutching jewels and robes, shoving one another in blind haste. Councilmen stumbled after them, shouting prayers and accusations. The priest vanished almost before anyone else, taking his silver blade with him. Only Seraphine lingered near the steps, eyes fixed on Lyra with a hatred sharpened by sudden fear. Kyle noticed her too late. From within the sleeve of her ceremonial gown she drew a narrow dagger of moon silver, slender as a fang. "If she is a monster," Seraphine hissed, "then let the curse die now." She threw the blade. Kale moved at once, but Lyra moved first. Not quickly, not with trained reflexes. With instinct, her body twisted to shield itself, and the dagger sank not into her heart, but into the flesh just below her ribs. The silver bit deep. Lyra gasped and staggered. For one silent beat, the whole world seemed to stop. Then the mountain roared. The force that erupted from her knocked Kale backward 3 paces, though he kept his feet. Every remaining torch went black. The windows shattered inward in a storm of glass and moonlight. The chandeliers overhead snapped from their chains and crashed onto the marble in showers of sparks. Heat flooded the hall so suddenly that banners caught fire where they hung. Seraphine screamed and fell, covering her face. Lyra's body arched in impossible pain, both hands flying to the wound in her side. But instead of blood, Golden fire spilled between her fingers, not burning her, escaping her. Kael stared, every battle instinct rendered useless before something no sword had ever taught him how to face. Beneath the fire, symbols appeared on Lyra's skin. They spread from the wound outward in curling, ancient lines that looked less like magic and more like language carved by flame itself. Runes, old beyond old. Kael knew war marks, Luna markings, the moon-born scripts of his own royal line. These were none of them. Yet somewhere in the deep locked vaults of memory passed down through blood and story, he felt the echo of what they meant. Not curse, not corruption. Sovereign. The words slammed through him with terrible certainty. Lyra sank to one knee again, clutching at the dagger still embedded in her side. And when she lifted her face to him, her expression was not monstrous. It was pleading. "Run," she said. "Please." A harsh breath shook her. "Before it sees you." It. The pronoun chilled him more than the heat ever could. "What sees me?" he demanded, stepping toward her. She shook her head in misery, unable or unwilling to answer. Then Kael smelled it. Not blood, not wolf, not human fear, but smoke, ancient smoke. Smoke from caverns and scorched gold and old bones sleeping beneath mountains. His wolf went dead silent. The sudden stillness of the beast frightened Kael more than any snarl could have, because his wolf did not submit, to no rival, to no king, to nothing. Yet now, it was listening. The hall ceiling groaned. Stone dust rained down. Outside, the fortress bells began ringing as sentries shouted from the battlements. Something had risen over Blackthorn Keep. He could hear it in their voices. Not attack, terror. Kael reached Lyra, just as another wave of power tore through her. This one did not throw him back. Instead, it wrapped around him in a storm of heat and sound. Images flashed behind his eyes. A tower of flame, wings wider than castle walls, a crown of blackened gold, a woman standing in the middle of a battlefield while wolves and men alike knelt in ash before her. Then the vision was gone, and Kael found himself gripping Lyra's shoulders despite her warning. Her skin was burning hot, but it did not consume him. It only seared through the leather of his gloves. "Lyra," he said, his voice lower now, steadier, as if speaking to a terrified beast in pain. "Look at me." She did. For an instant he saw two selves fighting behind her gaze, the fragile bride everyone had mocked, and something vast coiled behind her eyes, like a sleeping inferno beginning to wake. A horn blasted outside. Then another. Kael heard boots pounding in the corridor. His captain, Rowan, burst through the broken side doors with a squad of royal guards. He stopped dead at the sight before him. The destroyed hall, the burning tapestries, the shattered windows, and at the center of it all, the rejected bride glowing like the core of a furnace, while the AlphaKing stood over her instead of killing her. Rowan's sword came halfway out. "Your Majesty, no one touches her," Kael snapped. The captain froze, stunned. Around him, the guards exchanged uncertain looks. They could smell the power in the room. They could hear the mountain trembling. They wanted clear enemies. There were none. "Seal the hall," Kael ordered. "Evacuate the fortress levels beneath us. No one comes near this chamber without my command." Rowan hesitated only a breath before nodding. Loyalty won over fear. He turned and began barking orders. On the floor beside the shattered dais, Seraphine dragged herself up against a pillar, hair disheveled, her elegant face streaked with dust and a line of blood where flying glass had cut her temple. Hatred blazed in her eyes now with no effort to conceal it. "You cannot mean to protect her," she spat. "Look at what she is." Kael did not take his eyes off Lyra. "I know exactly what she is not," he said coldly. "She is not the one who threw a blade in my hall." Seraphine's face went white, then red with rage. "I did what your council should have done months ago, and nearly brought my fortress down around us," Kael said. "Pray, that is the worst of what your ambition has caused." If he had looked at her then, truly looked, He might have seen the tiny flicker of fear beneath her fury, the fear of a woman who realized she had not merely failed to kill her rival, but awakened something that might now destroy them all. Lyra's fingers closed weakly around his wrist. The contact jolted him. Her grip was burning, but no longer uncontrolled. "There's a chamber," she whispered, each word scraping out of her like it hurt to speak. "Under the keep. Old stone. Deep enough." Kale frowned. "How do you know that?" Her eyes unfocused briefly, as if she were listening to someone whispering inside the walls. "I don't know. I just know." Another shudder ran through her body. Golden light bled from beneath her shoulder blades now, outlining shapes that made Kale's blood run cold. Not magic. Structure. Something forming. Bones that did not belong to a human woman. Wings. "Move," Kale ordered. He slid one arm around her waist and hauled her upward just as the carved wolf throne behind them split in two from the pressure of the power building in the room. The sound was like thunder. Guards shouted. Stones fell from the ceiling in chunks now. Rowan rushed back to them. "The lower vaults are clear." Kale nodded once. "With me." Seraphine pushed away from the pillar in disbelief. "You would take that thing beneath the heart of the fortress? Better there than among fleeing nobles?" Kale said. "Lock Lady Seraphine in the East Tower. She leaves only when I say." Her mouth opened in outrage, but Rowan was already moving. Two guards seized her arms. She shrieked Kale's name, then curses, then promises of what the council would do when he came to his senses. He ignored every word. They half-led, half-carried Lyra through a hidden corridor behind the throne wall, down spiraling stone steps used in older wars as escape routes for the royal line. The deeper they went, the more unstable the magic around her became. Heat washed through the passage in waves. Old iron sconces dripped. Moss along the stones blackened as if winter and summer had passed over it in a single breath. Kyle felt every muscle in Lyra straining against herself. She was still trying to contain it, still trying not to become whatever waited beyond the edges of her skin. The realization struck him with unexpected force. She had not wanted to destroy his hall. She had been protecting them from something worse. "How long?" he asked quietly as they descended. Her voice was barely there. "Since I was 12. "You have held this back since you were 12? She gave the tiniest nod. The southern priests bounded. They called it mercy. Kale's jaw tightened. He had seen mercy used as a prettier word for torture too many times to believe in the priest's version of it. They reached the vault chamber at the lowest level of the keep, a circular room cut from mountain rock, older than the kingdom itself. Chains once used for ancient war beasts still hung from iron rings in the walls. Massive doors of black oak bound in silver stood open behind them. Moonlight could not reach this place. Only torch fire and the terrible radiance spilling from Lyra's skin lit the cavernous chamber. Kale guided her to the center. The instant he let go, she dropped to her knees, head bowed, hands pressed to the stone. "Go," she whispered again. "Before I can't tell what's mine anymore." He did not move. Rowan, standing near the doorway with 3 guards, looked as if he wished to argue and flee at the same time. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "if this thing becomes hostile, then these doors will not stop it," Kale answered. His voice was flat because truth required no drama. Lyra made a broken sound that might once have been a laugh. "At least," she murmured, "you're honest." Kale crouched in front of her. The wound in her side had closed around the moon-silver dagger, but the flesh around it had blackened in strange crystalline patterns. He reached toward the hilt. "No," she gasped, seizing his wrist with sudden strength. "Not yet. Silver weakens the binding. If you pull it out now." She stopped as a violent tremor racked her spine. Kale understood. The blade was the final crack in the seal. Remove it, and whatever ancient force had been caged in her blood would have nothing left to restrain it. He should have ordered chains. He should have treated her like a threat. Yet kneeling in front of her now, seeing the pain in the face of a woman who had been discarded and weaponized her whole life, all he felt was a savage, unfamiliar urge to protect. "Tell me what you are," he said. Lyra raised her head slowly. In the low firelight, her face seemed both younger and older than before. Younger in its naked suffering. Older in the shadows moving behind her eyes. "I don't know all of it," she admitted. "Only fragments. Dreams, voices, fire, a city buried in ash, a queen with wings." Her mouth trembled once, though she mastered it quickly. "The priests said my blood came from a forgotten line the world was right to erase." Kyle's gaze sharpened. "Forgotten by whom?" "By wolves," she whispered. "By kings, by everyone who survived them." Rowan and the guards exchanged grim looks. Ancient enemies, ancient monsters. Those stories filled nursery warnings and battlefield songs alike. Dragons belonged to the oldest legends, to the age before wolf kingdoms, before men named mountains and claimed rivers. But legends were bones. They did not bleed in wedding gowns before you. A sound rolled through the chamber then, not from above, not from the corridor, but from Lyra herself. A deep resonance. The beginning of a growl too large for a human throat. Every guard drew steel. Rowan stepped forward. Kale lifted one hand sharply. "No." Lyra's fingers dug into the rock hard enough to split skin. "It's waking," she said through clenched teeth. "When I was a child, I could only hear it. Then I could feel it when I bled. Then when I was afraid. But tonight." She squeezed her eyes shut as two great ridges of golden light swelled beneath the skin of her back. "Tonight, you broke the last vow." Kale's brow darkened. "What vow?" Her eyes flew open again, blazing crimson. "The vow that no king of wolves would ever claim me, and no dragon would ever rise in his court." The words hit him like prophecy spoken too late. Around them, the torches bent inward, all flame pulling toward Lyra, as if recognizing a greater fire. Then the doors above boomed. Once, twice, a third time. Rowan spun toward them. "The council," he snarled. They brought more guards. Kale's expression went cold. Of course they had. Panic traveled faster than truth in every court. The nobles would already be whispering that the AlphaKing had hidden a demon beneath the fortress. The council would want her dead before dawn, treaty or no treaty. "Hold them," Kale ordered Rowan. "No one enters." The captain hesitated only a second, then signaled his men and moved to brace the doors. The pounding grew louder. Voices echoed from the other side. Priests, councilmen, frightened commands. Words like abomination and execution, and cleanse it now. Lyra heard them all. Kale saw it in her face. The old helplessness returned for one brutal instant, and with it something darker. Rage. Not wild rage. The kind that forms when pain is repeated until it becomes structure. "They always come with chains," she whispered. "Or fire." Kale looked at her steadily. "Not tonight." Something changed in her at that. Not trust. Trust did not bloom that quickly in women made into offerings, but surprise. Deep and painful surprise. As if no one had ever stood between her and the mob before. The pounding on the doors became frantic now. Silver bolts screamed as they were tested from the other side. Lyra bowed over suddenly with a cry torn from the very base of her lungs. The ridges along her back split through silk and skin in a spray of glowing sparks. Kale heard bone lengthening. Heard it. Wings burst from her shoulders in half-formed arcs of ember and scale. Not fully flesh yet, but no longer only power either. Rowan cursed under his breath. One of the younger guards dropped his sword and stumbled back against the wall, white-faced. Lyra collapsed forward onto both hands, breathing in harsh, ragged pulls, as those impossible appendages twitched and spread behind her, casting vast, jagged shadows across the chamber walls. Kale had faced battlefields knee-deep in dead. He had torn out the throat of a rival alpha beneath a blood moon. He had watched men burn in siege fire and never once mistaken strength for beauty. Yet what he saw now was terrible and beautiful at once. Not because it was safe, because it was true. Something in Lyra was becoming visible that had never been allowed to exist in daylight. Scale patterns shimmered across the back of her neck, dark bronze edged in crimson. Her hands, still braced on stone, had changed too. The nails lengthened into black curved talons before retreating again halfway as she fought for control. Kale knew at once why the priests had called her cursed. Power like this terrified weak men. It could not be married off, contained, or politely ignored. So they named it evil and wrapped it in shame until even its bearer believed them. The great doors shuddered again. A bolt snapped. Voices shouted triumph. Rowan planted himself before the gap, sword raised. "We do not have long." Lyra laughed once, breathless and shattered. "Neither do I." Then she looked up at Kyle, with eyes so red they seemed lit from within. "If they come in while it's half awake, it will kill everything that moves." "Then wake it fully," he said. The words left him before caution could stop them. Rowan stared at him as if he had gone mad. Even Lyra went still. "You don't understand what you're saying." "Perhaps not," Kale said. "But I understand a hunted creature when I see one. Half-bound things are the most dangerous. Finish it." She searched his face for mockery and found none. "Why?" The question came out so quietly it almost vanished in the roar of the pounding doors. Why would the AlphaKing who had humiliated her before the entire court now choose this? Kale could have lied, could have called it strategy, necessity, politics. But in the heat and dust and rising terror of that ancient chamber, he found he had no patience left for court lies. "Because I think the wrong people taught you what you are." For one suspended second, the chamber became utterly still. Then, the final bolt broke. The doors burst inward. Priests in moon-white robes flooded the threshold with silver spears and sanctified chains, council guards behind them, fear dressed as righteousness in every face. At their center stood High Counselor Marrow, thin and severe, his voice already raised in command. "By authority of the Royal Council, the cursed bride is to be put down before sunrise." The sight that met him froze him mid-step. Lyra half transformed in a storm of fire and shadow, the AlphaKing standing between her and the weapons, and around them a chamber trembling like the inside of a waking volcano. Marrow recovered quickly, but not enough to hide the hatred in his eyes. "Your Majesty," he said, "step away from the abomination." Kale turned slowly. The look on his face made even seasoned warriors stiffen. "Say that word again," he said, "and I will show you how little your counsel means under my roof." Marrow swallowed, then lifted his chin. Men like him mistook law for courage because they had never needed real courage before. "The Southern records were clear," he said. "The girl carries the blood of the ash line." Several priests hissed prayers under their breath. Rowan's grip tightened on his sword. Kale's eyes narrowed. He knew old names. He knew the names kings were taught, never to speak in public, because names held memory. Ash Line was one of them. "Explain," he ordered. Marrow's expression twisted. Before the wolf kingdoms rose, there was another empire in the south. Dragon sovereigns ruled it, and one among them nearly burned the world in answer to betrayal. When the last of their line fell, the surviving pack swore no dragon blood would ever rise beside a wolf crown again. The child born of that line was to be sealed or slain. His gaze slid toward Lyra with disgust. The South chose sealing. We should not repeat their error. Lyra had gone frighteningly quiet. The light around her deepened from gold to molten white. "They slaughtered my bloodline," she said softly. No one answered. She lifted her head and called it balance. The priest advanced a step, silver spearheads leveled. "Do it now," Marrow snapped. "Before she becomes—" He never finished. KL drew his sword in one fluid motion and placed himself fully between them and Lyra. The sound of steel, clearing its scabbard, cut the chamber like fate. "Anyone who throws another blade," he said, "dies before it lands." Shock rocked the doorway. Even Rowan looked at him anew. This was no longer hesitation, no longer curiosity. This was a choice. Public, dangerous, irreversible choice. The priest faltered, and that was enough. Because in that narrow window between fear and action, Lyra's last restraint broke. The moon-silver dagger slid from her wound by itself, melted into glowing droplets, and vanished against the floor. Lyra screamed, not like a woman, not like a beast, but like something ancient being torn back into existence against the will of everyone who had tried to bury it. Fire erupted around her in a spiraling column, so bright the chamber walls turned white. The force threw priests and guards backward through the ruined doorway. Marrow crashed hard against the corridor stones. Rowan barely held his feet. Cale planted himself and stared straight into the inferno. Inside it, he saw her silhouette stretch and shatter and reform. Wings unfurled wider, fully scaled now, black bronze edged in burning red. Horns curved from her temples like crown points, forged in living flame. Her spine arched, lengthened, remade, under streaming ribbons of molten light. Yet even within that monstrous majesty, part of her remained unmistakably Lyra. The grief, the fury, the soul that had been humiliated in silk and now rose in fire. The chamber ceiling split. Stone rained down in chunks. The mountain answered with a roar from its deepest bones. Fire burst from the cracks in thin lines, racing over the old walls like veins waking after centuries of sleep. The dragon shape within the light dropped to all fours for one thunderous instant, then reared up again, half woman, half sovereign nightmare, a queen dragged from legend and betrayal. Every living being present felt it then. Not mere power, but authority. Ancient, terrible authority. Wolves whimpered. Priests fell to their knees. Even Cale's own beast lowered its head, not in surrender, but in the recognition due an equal from a forgotten age. Lyra opened her eyes fully, and when she did, the firestorm stopped obeying chaos. It began obeying her. The world held its breath, and the rejected bride, whom they had mocked, traded, wounded, and named, cursed all her life, rose from the center of ruin as the DragonQueen of the lost ash line. Her voice, when it came, shook the entire keep. No more chains. The words crashed through the vault, like a judgment spoken by the mountain itself. And for several long, stunned heartbeats, no one moved. Fire curled around Lyra's transformed body in slow, terrible ribbons, rising and falling with her breath, as though the chamber itself had become a living furnace bound to her pulse. The broken priests at the doorway remained on their knees, too horrified to advance, and too proud to flee. Counselor Marrow stared up at her with the ashen face of a man who had spent half his life controlling history through sealed records and whispered lies, only to watch the past stand before him in flame and prove it had survived. Rowan still had his sword in hand, but the steel looked pitiful now, absurdly small against the sovereign terror dominating the chamber. Cale alone remained upright at the center of it, sword lowered but not sheathed, his face lit by dragon fire and decision. Lyra's wings shuddered once, shedding sparks. They were not yet the massive wings of the vision Kyle had seen, but neither were they a trick of magic anymore. They were real, scaled, edged, like obsidian and bronze, broad enough to fill the chamber with their shadows. Her torn wedding dress hung in scorched ribbons around a body caught between woman and something older, greater, hungrier. Golden black scales traced her shoulders and spine. A crown of horned ridges curved from her temples through her dark hair. When she drew breath, the flames around her brightened, responding to instinct before thought. Yet beneath that vast and frightening rebirth, Cale still saw the wounded girl who had been offered to wolves as a political sacrifice. He saw it in the tremor at the corner of her mouth, in the way her fingers flexed against the stone as if she were testing a body that no longer entirely belonged to human memory, in the way her gaze, after sweeping over the kneeling priests and the shattered doorway, came back to him with something rawer than fury. She had become power itself, and still the first face she searched for in the chaos was the man who had publicly humiliated her less than an hour ago. Marrow found his voice first, because cowardly men often discovered courage only when hidden behind doctrine. "Kill it," he rasped, shoving himself backward against the corridor wall as if distance could restore authority. Kill it before it leaves this chamber, before the blood oath is broken again. The priests looked to Kale, not Marrow. Even terrified, they knew which command truly ruled Blackthorn Keep. Kale's expression did not change. "She has a name," he said. The quiet force of the words cut deeper than a shout. Marrow's face twisted. That thing forfeited any name the moment its dragon blood awoke. "We sealed that line for a reason." Lyra's head turned toward him with unnerving stillness. Firelight rippled along the scales at her throat. "You sealed children," she said softly. "You hunted mothers. You buried kingdoms and called the ash peace." Marrow opened his mouth to deny it, but something in her eyes strangled the lie before it formed. Some truths were too old and too soaked in blood to survive direct sunlight. The priests shifted uneasily, silver spears wavering. They had entered the vault expecting a demon to cleanse, a cursed bride to execute. Instead, they had found an ancient queen speaking in the language of inheritance and slaughter. And beneath their fear, a more dangerous realization had begun to spread. If Lyra was not a corruption, then the church and the council had built generations of power atop a deliberate falsehood. Men would commit atrocity to preserve kingdoms, but they would commit worse to preserve the stories that justified them. Kale knew it at once. He also knew Marrow knew it. That was why the counselor would not stop. "Your Majesty," Marrow said, forcing steadiness back into his voice. "Step aside. This is no longer a matter of marriage or treaty. This is the return of a bloodline our ancestors swore never to permit. If you protect her, you betray the wolf crown itself." The chamber waited. Kale looked at Lyra. He remembered the moment in the great hall when she had pleaded with him not to touch her, not because she feared pain, but because she feared what her pain would do to others. He remembered the resignation in her eyes when he rejected her publicly. The years of silence that must have taught her humiliation was safer than hope. He remembered, too, the way she had asked why. Why would he help her? Why would he stand between her and chains? That question had carved deeper into him than he wanted to admit. Wolves respected strength. Kings worshipped control. But there was another thing, rarer than either, and infinitely more dangerous once it appeared. Recognition. Recognition of the one person in the room who had been lied about more completely than anyone else. "If the wolf crown demands the slaughter of an innocent to survive," Kyle said at last, "then the crown has been weak for longer than I thought." Rowan inhaled sharply. Marrow's eyes widened in disbelief. The priests recoiled as though struck. Kale lowered his sword point to the stone and spoke with cold, final precision. "No one touches Lyra Vale." The choice rippled outward like thunder. In the corridor beyond the ruined doors, frightened guards exchanged looks of utter confusion. Some stepped back. Others, loyal first to the council and then to fear, tightened their grip on sanctified chains and blessed steel. Marrow saw his chance narrowing and lunged for it. "Then you are blinded," he hissed. "By the mate bond, by sorcery, by whatever old poison she has breathed into your blood." At that word, something electric flashed through the chamber. Mate bond. Kale felt it a half-second before he understood it, an invisible line pulling taut beneath his skin, a hot, violent awareness that began low in his chest and spread like wildfire through his veins. His wolf surged forward, not in aggression, but in recognition so sharp it nearly stole the breath from him. Lyra jerked as though struck by the same force. Their eyes locked. For one disorienting instant, the burning vault disappeared, and KL felt only her. Her fear, her exhaustion, her years of forced obedience, her rage so old it had roots, and somewhere beneath all of it a fragile, furious refusal to be broken. The sensation vanished almost as quickly as it came, but not before both of them knew. Lyra stepped back as if the invisible connection had burned her more deeply than her own fire. "No," she whispered, and the word carried more shock than denial. Kale's grip tightened on his sword. He had rejected her in ignorance. Now the truth hit him with merciless clarity. The restlessness in his wolf, the impossible pull at first sight. The instinct to protect her before reason had caught up. It had been there from the beginning, hidden, perhaps, by the seal on her blood, or by the violent old vow she had spoken of. But now the final barrier had fallen. The AlphaKing of wolves had publicly rejected the very woman fate had bound to him, and in doing so had awakened a DragonQueen beneath his own roof. For a man who prided himself on control, the irony would have been bitter under any other circumstances. Now it was simply unbearable. Mero saw understanding cross Kale's face and smiled thinly, sensing weakness. There. You feel it now, don't you? That is how she wins. That is how her kind always won. Seduction through power, domination through blood. Mero never finished the sentence. Lyra moved first. She did not lunge. She did not scream. She lifted one hand, and a ring of fire snapped into existence around the councilmen and priests at the doorway, not touching them, but penning them in with a heat so intense they stumbled backward, crying out. The fire rose head high in a perfect circle, controlled to the inch. Kyle's gaze sharpened. This was not frenzy anymore, not merely a transformation gone wild. This was sovereignty. Lyra's voice came low and cold, stripped now of the frailty the court had mistaken for weakness. "Speak of my bloodline again," she said, "and I will show you what your ancestors feared enough to bury." Mero fell silent. No one doubted her. But power came with a price. Kale saw it before anyone else did. The fire ring held, but Lyra swayed. The scales along one side of her neck flickered strangely, appearing and receding as though her new form were still arguing with her body. The transformation had not finished cleanly. It was too much, too soon, forced open by pain and treachery. If she kept burning power at this rate, she would either collapse or lose control entirely. Kale sheathed his sword and took one measured step toward her. Instantly, every eye in the chamber snapped to him. Lyra's gaze sharpened. "Don't," she said, and for the first time since rising in flame, there was uncertainty in her voice, not fear of him, fear of what she might do to him. The distinction mattered. "I'm not here to restrain you," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, and that answer struck him harder than suspicion would have. She did know. Somehow, absurdly, impossibly, she knew. From above them came another distant crash. The keep itself was no longer stable. Blackthorn had been built over older foundations, and whatever dragon line architecture or forgotten wards slept in the mountain did not seem pleased to be waking after centuries of suppression. Rowan glanced upward, then back to Kyle. "Your Majesty, the upper halls are near panic. The nobles are already spreading word that the cursed bride turned into a demon and the king has lost his reason. Several clan lords are rallying their guards." An almost humorless smile touched Kale's mouth. "Then they're doing what frightened men always do." Rowan nodded grimly. "If they unite with the council, you may be facing open revolt before dawn." Kale's gaze flicked once more to Lyra, to the firelight breathing around her, to the exhaustion hidden beneath the majesty. Political collapse should have been his first concern. Instead, his first thought was that she could not survive another attack in this state. That realization irritated him because it was dangerous, and because it came too naturally. Mero, trapped beyond the ring of fire, seized on Rowan's words. "Listen to your captain," he shouted. "The realm will not accept a DragonQueen in Wolflands. The packs will never bow to her. Kill her now, and you may still contain this." Lyra did not turn toward him. She looked only at Kale, as though his answer had somehow become the axis upon which the room turned. "Would they follow you?" she asked him, "if you chose me?" There was no softness in the question, no hopeful trembling. It was a ruler's question, asked by someone who understood the cost of every alliance and every crown. Kale answered, with the same brutal honesty he had given her in the vault. Some would. Some would pretend to until they found a safer rebellion. Some would rather burn the kingdom than kneel beside what they were taught to fear. Lyra's expression did not shift. "And you?" The fire ring hissed, Dust fell from the cracked ceiling. Kale stepped closer, until he stood only a few paces from her, near enough to feel the heat curling over his skin like living breath. "I already made one choice in ignorance," he said. "I won't make the next one the same way." The words settled between them, heavy and unfinished. Lyra stared at him, and something in her fierce, exhausted face changed. Not forgiveness. He had not earned that. Not yet. But the first fracture in the wall she had built around herself opened there, just enough for possibility to exist. Then pain hit her again. Her wings convulsed outward with a harsh metallic rasp of scales and bone. She dropped to one knee, one hand slamming into the stone floor hard enough to crack it in a spider web. The fire ring around the council wavered. Marrow instantly shouted for the priest to strike. Two of them raised their silver spears and hurled them through the weakening flames. Kale moved on instinct. He snatched one spear from the air and twisted aside from the second. Lyra saw the weapon streaking toward him and reacted before thought. Flame burst between them, vaporizing the spear to silver steam a handspan from his throat. The effort nearly threw her flat. That was enough. Kale's patience ended with a coldness that terrified everyone who knew him. He turned toward the councilmen and priests, eyes like winter steel. "Rowan." His captain did not hesitate. "Take Marrow and every priest in that doorway. Disarm them. Chain them. If anyone resists, break their legs first and ask questions later." Rowan's answering grin was brief and savage. "Gladly." The fire ring dropped at Lyra's gesture, and royal guards loyal to Kale surged forward. The corridor erupted into shouts, metal, and pain. Marrow protested, invoked law, lineage, holy duty. No one cared. He went down under Rowan's gauntleted fist and was dragged from the floor by the collar, like a scholar who had wandered into a war he did not understand. The priests fared no better. Silver clattered. Sanctified chains were used on the men who had brought them. Justice, Kale had learned long ago, was often most efficient when stripped of ceremony. When the last of the council faction had been hauled from the threshold, the vault fell strangely quiet. Only the crackle of flame and Lyra's unsteady breathing remained. Kale crossed the chamber slowly. He stopped within arm's reach and waited. A lesser man might have reached for her at once, hoping tenderness would mend what violence had broken. Kyle understood too well that tenderness offered before trust could feel like another form of taking. Lyra remained kneeling, head bowed, wings partly unfurled behind her in scorched majesty. At length she said, without looking up, "You should hate me." The confession came so quietly that another man might have missed it. Kyle did not. "For destroying my hall?" he asked. "For nearly bringing your kingdom into rebellion." She finally lifted her face. "For being what I am." The rawness in those 6 words spoke more clearly than tears. She was not asking whether wolves feared dragons. She already knew they did. She was asking whether he, knowing the full truth, would now recoil the way everyone else eventually had. Kale knelt in front of her. The act itself startled her more than any speech could have done. Kings did not kneel, not to broken brides, not to monsters from buried dynasties. Yet there he was, one knee on the cracked stone, bringing himself level to her gaze. "Lyra," he said, and the simple use of her name sounded different now, deliberate and grounded. "I hate what was done to you. I hate the lies wrapped around you until even you half believe them. I hate that I helped those lies in my hall." The admission cost him pride, which meant it cost him more than most men would understand. Her throat worked. "But I do not hate you." Something bright and dangerous flickered across her face, Hope's uglier, more cautious cousin. She looked away first. "You might, when you see all of it." Kale's mouth hardened. "Then let me decide that after I've seen it." A strange silence followed, intimate despite the ruin around them. Above, the fortress still groaned. Somewhere distant, bells rang and shouts echoed through corridors as clan banners shifted, and fear organized itself into politics. But here, in the oldest heart of the mountain, Two beings bound by fate and blood sat amid shattered law and waking fire, and the future of kingdoms narrowed to the distance between one steady breath and the next. Lyra's wings folded inward slightly. The motion was clumsy, painful. She was still learning where her own body ended. Kael noticed the strain at once. "You need rest." She gave him a look so exhausted it was almost amused. "Do dragon queens rest in your kingdom?" "Tonight," he said, rising. "They do if the AlphaKing orders it." That earned the ghost of a laugh from her, thin and unbelieving, but real. The sound went through him like heat finding a crack in armor. Rowan returned a few moments later, blood on one sleeve, and satisfaction in every line of him. "Marrow and the priests are secured. Seraphine broke one guard's nose and nearly escaped the East Tower, but she's chained now and threatening to poison half the kingdom through marriage alliances." Kael barely spared her a thought. "Let her threaten." Rowan's gaze slid to Lyra, then back to his king. There was still caution in it, but not fear anymore. Rowan had watched Kael choose. That mattered. "The clan lords are assembling in the upper council chamber. They demand an answer before dawn." Kael nodded once. The answer, of course, would determine whether Blackthorn Keep woke to civil war or submission. He should go immediately. He should crush revolt before it took shape. Yet when he turned toward the stairs, Lyra's hand closed weakly around the edge of his cloak. The touch was light, almost accidental, but it stopped him more effectively than any command. He looked back. She had not meant to grab him, he realized. Her body had reached before her pride caught up. For one brief second, exposed in the aftershock of pain and transformation, she looked very young, not weak, simply tired of facing every horror alone. "Will they come for me again?" she asked. The question was small, but it carried the full weight of a life lived under judgment. Kael bent and drew his cloak from his shoulders. It was heavy black wolf fur lined with iron-threaded leather, warm from his own body. Without flourish, he draped it around her. Against scales and torn bridal silk, the gesture looked almost ceremonial. "Yes," he said, because he had promised honesty. "They will." Her fingers tightened in the fur. "Then why leave?" His gaze held hers. "Because I need to remind them," he said softly, "that if they come for you again, they come through me." The fire in the chamber dimmed, as if listening. Lyra stared up at him in silence, wrapped now in the AlphaKing's own cloak. Dragon wings half hidden beneath wolf fur, like two old empires trying not to recognize each other. Kael straightened and turned to Rowan. "Post my personal guard at every passage leading down here. No priest, lord, or councilman enters without losing a hand first. Send for the royal healer, not a church physician, not a council ally. One of ours. Someone who obeys me." Rowan inclined his head. "At once." Kael took 2 steps toward the stairway, then stopped. Without facing her, he said, "Lyra." She looked up. "When I return, I want the truth. All of it. No more priests' versions. No more council records. Yours." A long pause followed. Then came her answer, steady despite everything. "If you return," she said, "I'll give it." Kael almost smiled at that. Almost. "I always return." Then he climbed the steps toward the rebellion gathering above, carrying with him the knowledge that before dawn he would either hold his kingdom together by sheer force of will, or watch it split between wolves of the old world and the DragonQueen of the buried one. And below, in the deep chamber beneath Blackthorn Keep, Lyra sat alone for the first time, not as a caged offering or a cursed bride, but as a sovereign awakening into her own name, wrapped in the scent and oath of the man who had rejected her before the court and chosen her before the fire. Neither of them yet understood that the true betrayal had only just begun, because in the East Tower, chained and bloodied and smiling through split lips, Seraphine was not praying for rescue. She was waiting for the traitorous general she had summoned weeks ago. And before the moon set, Blackthorn Keep would burn from within. Above Blackthorn Keep, the night had turned unnaturally bright, not with dawn, not with moonrise, but with fear. The fortress that had stood unconquered through blood wars, famine winters, and rival alpha sieges, now trembled beneath a threat that had not come from beyond its walls, but from the lies coiled deep inside them. Bells rang from tower to tower in frantic iron voices. Clan banners snapped in the wind across the upper battlements as armed retainers flooded courtyards and corridors, every noble house trying to decide, in the span of a few panicked minutes, whether loyalty to the throne would preserve their future.